but I for years remembered a little bit. There were several poems that are cited in there.
And that
I'd
was
like
one
to
of
read
them.
two of them to you.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah,
Okay.
I want to hear it.
I hope to God you keep all of this in the episode, even
Oh,
though we are
I'm
not.
just gonna fade it in.
Are you on the edge of your seat?
I literally am.
I never nursed a dear gazelle to glad me with its dappled hide, but when it came to know me well, it fell upon the buttered side. Thomas Hood.
I like that.
Isn't that wonderful?
I like that. There's a nice visualization to that. It's almost like nonsense is a good way of putting it because like if you like I bet reading that like word by word, line by line is very different than taking it as like a whole. You know,
Yeah.
because it's like, okay, yeah, all these are all words that I know, but you put them together in that order, and I'm not entirely sure what they mean, but in like a fun way.
Well,
So,
and Burgess wrote, think, an immediate wake of this poem, and I'll read one more short
mhm.
poem too after this, but it was Burgess Johnson wrote, think, cries nonsense. Your common sense is clogging the machinery of ratiocination. Your axioms soft pedal the vibrating strings of the mind. Thoughts are not stimulated by any final statement of concrete fact. They are they are set at rest. Let me say that one more time.
Oh, okay.
Thoughts are not stimulated by any final statement of concrete fact. They are set at rest, but a statement which apparently means nothing at all will at once set them going. Not understand? Take me hence, take me yonder, take me to the land of my rest, there where the Ganges and the other G's wander, and uncles and antelopes act for the best, and all things are mixed and run into each other in a violet twilight of virtues and sins, where the church spires below you, and no one can show you where the curate leaves off and the pew rent begins. Well, that was fun. So, I'm here as I'm Nick, Pennsylvania. You've probably been hearing me for a little bit, and then you wouldn't be surprised to know that I'm not talking to myself. I'm talking to my good friend Brendan Bond. Brendan, how you doing?
I'm doing excellent, man. I'm doing excellent. It's been a long, crazy week, and I'm excited to be talking to you about cryptids.
I'm happy to be talking to you too, but I have a confession to make. Yes, I did. I did find that essay that I spoke about.
Hmm.
I had originally set out though to look up stories as you had requested,
Hmm.
and two things happened. One, I found that essay, and then that threw my whole afternoon off. And
That's
two,
out the window.
yeah, right out the window in the best possible way. But two, I realized not only was this the concept of what we are to speak about tonight brought to my attention through the writings of Tim Renner, who, of course, we've had on the show, Beyond the Seventh Gate,
Yep.
Never Minded the Loneliness, just two of his, he has quite a few books, and
Hmm.
can't recommend them enough. Super nice guy. Again, he's been kind enough
Hmm.
to be on the show here, but you wanted to talk tonight about the Albatwitch. And I am
Yes.
only been made familiar about this through the writing of Tim, and a part of me feared that if I dug, would I only find Tim or Tim
So,
adjacent information out
yeah,
there?
no, it is funny how there is a lot of Tim information out there, which is great and well earned because he has done a lot of like compiling of old stories, and he's just done a lot of work in that because I mean he's located right outside of Columbia and has been kind of an advocate for the folklore and the history and the culture of the region out there. So a lot of well earned respect when it comes to the Albatwitch. and his name. Funny enough, did find some other folks while looking stuff up, even just this evening. But yeah, so the Albatwitch. Some people say Albatwitch. There's a few different ways you hear people pronounce it. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Nick, before we even get into what it is, because I know we've mentioned it before. So a lot of places reference that this is a Pennsylvania Dutch English hybrid type name. And as the resident German expert in between the two of us, I wanted to see what your take was on the name. So, like, there are some people who think it's kind of like an English version of apple snitch because it takes apples, but there are apparently German origins of the name that use the words apple and elf, or elf and spirit, or things of that nature. Is there anything about the word Albatwitch that you pick out as German, just in
I,
your own etymology?
I mean, I'm not sure because the German spoken by the Pennsylvania Dutch is Pennsylvanic is an older dialect, and of course, it's being
So yeah.
separated, but it
Mm-hmm.
has evolved, and it has evolved differently. So I
Mm-hmm.
have friends. I am not a native speaker. I am very much a learner.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say, ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, aber ich spreche wie ein kleines Kind. I speak a bit of German, but I speak like a very small child. Some native speakers that I know that live around me, though, have said the they can under the Deutsch can understand them.
Mm-hmm.
They understand some of it, but it's somewhat dramatic because there's different words and everything. So, like you said, like apple, elf. I don't know a word for elf per se. It might just be elf, even though that's kind of like that's the same as 11.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Apple is Apfel,
Okay, so
Apfel. It's
that's
Apfel.
pretty close to the English.
But
Yeah.
just like there's been a vowel shift in English, there seems to be some consonant differentiation
Mm-hmm.
between Pennsylvania Deutsch and German
Like German.
Deutsch,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that is like Jumpa can in ich Jumpa mean like I run.
Mm-hmm.
In Pennsylvania Deutsch, it's I jump, ich Jumpa.
Oh, so it's like
And you
it's
can
even a
see the
different.
English
Yeah.
coming in
Yeah.
and everything.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I don't know, but Alpbel, I don't know. And the other thing too is
Mm-hmm.
most of the people that make up the Deitch community here in Pennsylvania, in Indiana and Ohio, they came over, that would have been mid 18th century, I do believe. So
Mm-hmm.
a little before the American Revolution, I believe. So I don't know what German language was like back then. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously the German that I know is very different. It would be
Right,
not
right.
dissimilar. Like let's consider like in English we had the long S. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have that anymore to confuse like that weird F
Correct.
thing and the rules that abide by it.
Right.
But even like going back to Elizabethan English, not that further back,
Mm-hmm.
compare, we would struggle in our common speech to get around. It would take quite a bit of time for us to acclimate. It wouldn't be too dissimilar from us, say, being dropped. I don't know. It would be like us being dropped in
Middle England.
Elizabethan
Yeah.
era. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it would be a challenge,
Right. No, so I was
linguistically.
I was just curious because I saw a lot of places saying that it had German and Pennsylvania Dutch origins. It seems to be there's obviously some debate over the name and everything. Um,
Yeah, I
I
mean, if you wanted me to say apple witch in German, I would say Apfelhexe.
so yeah,
That
so
would be
which
the
is different.
closest thing I could get.
Yeah, which so but so the Albatwitch, what the Albatwitch is, that's how I'm going to pronounce it. I like the idea. This is another digression, but I love the idea of an alias of Al, like Alvin, Batwitch as a last name. So if you're out there and you're looking to front like a horror punk band and you want to go by the name Al Batwitch, I think that sounds like a great idea.
I support it.
Yeah. But so what these Albatwitches are is they're a type of cryptid, and they are really localized in a particular area called Chickies Rock. Chickies Rocks, excuse me. So what these are is a lot of times people say in their stories and when talking about them that they're often confused with juvenile Bigfoot. So a lot of the flesh and blood Bigfoot folks say that Bigfoot, have babies just like regular animals. They grow up, and there are juvenile versions of them, and that's what are mistaken for these Albatwitches because they're typically said to be 3.5, 4 feet tall. They're typically said to be a little skinnier. A lot of times, whenever we think about Bigfoot, we think about them being like big, hulking, broad, barrel-chested, whereas a lot of these Albatwitch sightings talk about them being a lot leaner, not like sickly or anything, but just like, kind of lanky. And that seems to kind of go along with some of their purported behavior. They're often seen in trees, and people believe they live in trees. So they're almost more like a monkey than like an ape in that sense. A lot of times they spend time in trees, apparently. The things that they are known for is also, again, kind of like old world monkey behavior, and they steal apples very specifically, and they're known to throw these apples. um, so they're a very like mischievous cryptid, apparently. Now, some of the things that are a little weird about them that don't fall into like regular the regular creature category is they're often said to have glowing eyes of different types. And some of the reports that you hear have kind of like otherworldly kind of elements to them that almost get into like some of like the Fey realms and some of those old stories. Like there's a little bit of a trickster element to it, and there's a bit of an otherworldly element to it. And a lot of that, like I said, really is centered around this Chickies Rock area. I keep saying rocks area, which is right outside of the town out there of Columbia. And this is in Lancaster, in kind of east central Pennsylvania, in the south. Nick, have you ever been out there to Columbia?
Yeah, I sure have.
It's a nice
That's
little town.
It's
It's really
not
cute.
bad.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that's interesting is this is in that Harrisburg, York region, and Pennsylvania. We're very spread out here in
Hmm.
Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
You and I live north of Pittsburgh. To get to Pittsburgh is a nuisance, but
Hmm.
it's not too bad. To get to Erie, it's like an hour and a half.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of towns the size of Consequence, but when you get into the Harrisburg area, you get Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg,
Hmm.
York, Gettysburg, Lancaster. These are all very close.
Hmm.
Like from Mechanicsburg to Gettysburg is a hop and a skip, and from
Right.
Gettysburg to York,
They're like 50 minutes apart,
it
basically.
feels that way.
It
I
feels
mean,
that
it's a
way.
little more than that,
Yeah.
but not
Yeah.
really
Not a
much.
lot. Yeah.
No. But yeah, I have been out there, and the one thing I'll say is this. So it's a cryptid, is what people are
Hmm.
saying, and they are really the range of their movement seems to be incredibly isolated, not even
Yes.
to a
Yeah.
county-wide thing. So I don't know if you could call that a cryptid. You'd have to call that like I don't know what you call that. Like there's a couple outliers,
Right.
and they're
Yeah.
here.
Right. Well, that's the thing is there's parts of it that sound like Bigfoot, and there's other parts that sound a little different in some cases. And I guess like you do have there's a term for it in biology where you have isolated populations that develop differently throughout their evolution because of because they're isolated, like on islands, and that's clearly not the case here, but that's kind of the analog that I would use if people are
Yeah.
talking about it from like a flesh and blood standpoint, because it doesn't because you do have other Bigfoot reports in the area.
And they're not getting mixed up with these things too often.
That's what it seems like. So, but that's what I was saying earlier is there
In
you do have people saying, "Oh, maybe it was a juvenile Bigfoot," and then someone chimes in and says that was an Albatwitch.
Yeah, and in linguistics, that term is the language
Oh, is that
isolate.
what it is? Okay, thank you. Yes.
So in biology, it's
Hmm.
probably not something that far from
That
that, but
dissimilar,
yeah,
right? Um,
same idea though. It's just and it's kind of you could say the Pennsylvania Dutch is kind of like that. It's an isolate,
right,
or
right,
it certainly was before modern communications.
right. So, what I kind of want to do is go over a one of the recent sightings that someone had, and then kind of get into what I think is kind of interesting about like this area and some of the other things that kind of happen there. So again, this Chickies Rocks area is it's a pretty decent sized area that's just between a few other kind of like landmarks and everything. And there is a lot of history in the area. But before we kind of get to that history and some of the locale, I want to talk about a recent sighting because this sighting is just from April of last year, which in the world of sightings is not that long ago. This is relatively modern, even though there is a history to this stuff. So basically, what happened is there is a gentleman named Rick Fisher, who is a researcher and author in the area, much like Tim Renner. I would be shocked if they didn't know each other, either through just working at events or just just being weird dudes in town, you know. Uh,
Running into each other in the woods in the middle of the night.
Right. Yeah, that has to be awkward. When you're trying to like, trying to investigate an area and you run
Catch a
across someone else.
scoop.
Right. I bet that happens with ghost hunting groups too. I bet that's not unique.
I would
Um,
love a situation where two ghost hunting groups, trying to be innocuous, to not to spook the spirits,
yeah.
the flighty spirits are scaring the hell out of each other or confirming each other's existence.
That's actually a good movie
Let's make this
plot
play.
idea. That sounds like a great like farce play
Yes.
even. We need to work on that.
Yeah.
No one steal that idea.
Put it on the wall, Bren.
Yeah, yeah. So, so this gentleman, Rick Fisher, got a report from someone in town who remained anonymous. But this is again from April 13th of 2024, and where this takes place is the Lancaster's Conservancy Fishing Creek Nature Preserve, which if you want to Google it, it's a beautiful looking area. Kind of reminds me of like Todd Run out here, like some of the areas that are kind of left pretty wild for the most part for people to just kind of enjoy. It's not like a park. It's just a relatively wild space in an area that's pretty heavily developed nowadays. But so this witness and a friend were out in a nature preserve at night, just kind of like parking and checking the area out and everything. And as they were out in the preserve, they kept hearing unsettling sounds persisting throughout the evening, just hearing weird stuff. They kept smelling what they specifically said was a wet dog, which is again a pretty unique smell, which we hear in a lot in Bigfoot and straight up Bigfoot accounts. People say it smells like a skunk or rotting meat or something like that. But a wet dog is like sort of what like it's a pretty particular smell. And then while they were in the car, they thought something was thrown at them on a few occasions, but couldn't find what the object was and couldn't really identify, admittedly, if it was something that was in fact thrown at them or if it was just things dropping onto the car, you know?
Yeah. All right, not to get too ahead, but I don't think we can take anything from that because there's nothing
Yeah,
phantom thrown at.
right, right. I think this is kind of setting the stage for a creepy encounter, maybe. So at one point, the witness left the vehicle to go relieve himself, and with his friend in the car. Whenever he was doing this, he saw what he says was a face looking at him from behind a small tree that looked like a monkey. Like that's what he says. It looked like a monkey. Doesn't say Bigfoot, doesn't say, Albatwitch, says monkey. The face was pale, not entirely white, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to lock onto his. Kind of makes eye contact with this thing. He was obviously frightened by this. The creature kind of didn't really seem to react, didn't seem agitated, didn't seem hostile. And then the creature ducks behind this small tree and disappears. So the witness and their partner left, ended up reporting this to this Rick gentleman, and they decided to go back the next day. Couldn't find any signs, but they did find this like it could still smell like the whole wet dog thing. So this guy only had kind of like a passing glimpse at this thing, but long enough that he got to really kind of like look at it. He said the thing seemed like it was crouched down, so really couldn't tell how tall it was. Now, this Rick Fisher gentleman, being an investigator, goes out the following day to kind of confirm the sighting area, finds the tree that this guy apparently saw this thing behind. And the tree is like maybe 6 to 8 inches wide. It's a small tree, which doesn't make any sense. Like nothing could really hide behind it, at least naturally. And when Rick was out there, apparently the ground was pretty heavily packed. So couldn't find any real footprints, but did find a few heel prints, but obviously couldn't say that those were definitely from, a creature or something like that. And that was what Rick reported the witness experienced. Now, they do have some photos online at a few places that this Rick gentleman has of the location. And again, the interesting thing is when you look at it, like again, nothing could hide behind a tree like this, which I think is a really interesting kind of like paranormal element to the
I'll
story.
I'll agree
Yeah.
to that because
Yeah.
obviously my first instinct is like,
Mm-hmm.
are these kids messing about? There's a local
Mm-hmm.
story, take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you pull those pictures up? Yeah,
I will
so
send
I
them
mean
over.
that's my instinct is to go to that.
Like it's hard to tell like if someone's messing with us or not, obviously. But what that immediately reminded me of, Nick, are you familiar with I think it was originally Greek, but I'm sure it's been in multiple cultures, but the idea of dryads, like nature spirits that like live in
Oh yeah.
trees and stuff. Again, I think those are Greek. I could be wrong, but that's what it sounded like to me. Is it sounded like this little creature that literally pops in and out of trees. So, like when I read this, I don't read it as an Albatwitch sighting. I read it as a dryad sighting. That was my first thought. But again, this nature preserve seems like a really pretty area. And it looks, I mean, you can imagine it being spooky at night.
Sure.
Like you sit out in the woods anywhere, even when you're used to being in the woods can be spooky. It doesn't take much, at least for
Yeah,
me,
especially if you're
you
so
know.
removed from it, typically.
Right.
You're
Hmm.
outside of your comfort zone and everything.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, I'm scrolling all the way down and there's some artwork by Tim Renner on this page where I'm
Oh,
looking
is
at
there?
the
Yeah. See, there we go.
so
But now, what people say a lot of times is these things are mischievous, but not like aggressive. Which so that kind of does match with this account. Now, there are other reports in the area, like there's been dozens and dozens of reports over the years. A lot of them there's almost like flaps that happen in the 20s, the 50s, the 70s, but a lot of them go back to the 1800s and then apparently before the 1800s.
really.
Some people say they go the whole way back actually to native cultures who had interactions with these spirits or these I said spirits, these creatures even as late as even as early as the 1500s. So apparently there was a battle that took place on Chickies Rocks where apparently there was hundreds of casualties that lasted over a period of like a relatively long period of time, like a few days. And folks say that the whole area is haunted. Some people say that the Susquehannock used to paint images of the Albatwitches on things. I couldn't actually find any of those. It's a cool sounding idea, but again, I couldn't find it.
Yeah, and
Um,
if it's based on oral histories, the thing with oral histories is they're only known to us because they've been recorded somewhere.
right,
So
right,
I would need to
precisely.
have at least some like period recording of an oral history where it made reference to that. Because we've
Right.
seen false antiquity presented to us before. I think specifically of like ear candles. There was a moment I thought ear
Hmm.
candles was like a thing, and it's sold to you because they say it's this ancient thing. Well, it's not in any way, shape, or form at all. So I'm cautious to buy into that without there being some evidence. And again, that doesn't mean I'm going to dismiss an
Right.
oral tradition,
Hmm.
but
Right, yeah, and again, the evidence might be out there. I just haven't seen it. I think what is really happening in this area a lot too is just, it's a relatively spooky area in general. There's other, so there's other stories, like another Albatwitch story. A lot of them, some of them do sound like just almost straight up Bigfoot stories. So, like, here is one from right up the river in Redline. This was originally on Phantoms and Monsters, Lon Strickler's blog. There was a woman who was driving up. Route 624 outside of Red Line. She noticed something running across a field. She pulled over to observe the oddity. She saw a 4 foot tall bipedal creature covered in sparse, dark gray hair. The witness said that the head of the cryptid was smaller than that of a human child of the same height. She watched the creature for several minutes, saying it would stop, look around, and then continue running again until it finally reached a patch of woods. The idea of a haired 4 foot tall creature with a small head for some reason, boy, does that creep me out.
Yeah, it's
I
something
don't like
like
that. I don't like that
nah.
story at all.
It's kind of like the Lovecraft creation of the brown chink and the rat with human hands
Right. Yeah. Stuff
and
like, oh,
feet.
ugh. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just like very unsettling. And even this gentleman, Rick Fisher, who we were talking about, has he has a sighting. I think it was back in the 90s, where he saw like it was basically like again a road crossing with one of these things that apparently had glowing yellow eyes. And you hear that in a lot of like the older kind of stories and everything. And one of the things I think that is again really kind of happening in this area, because again a lot of the stories just kind of people kind of talking about these things kind of in passing. There are apparently photos out there. The photos are just as bad as you think, and unconvincing. But if you want
All
to find
right.
them, they are out there. But so
Don't
this
act
chicken.
like I'm not looking those
Oh,
up right
look them
now.
up. Oh, look them up. They're maybe they will sway you. We'll see. But
I would love to see that.
be great if that was the case. But I think what's fascinating with this, though, with the Albatwitch, like you say, because it's in such a small area, so it's like, what is special or unique about this area? So there's a few things. One, not only does it have like significance to a number of native tribes who have lived and inhabited the area for hundreds of years at least, but so this Chickies Rock area, it's like 200-foot tall like cliffs of this like quartz rock. It's really kind of striking. So not only does it look unique, but because it's kind of this cliffy, craggy area, just like we talk about places around here, people have been dying there for years. So it just kind of has a bit of a stigma in the area of being like a spooky place. There have been 7 iron furnaces in the Chickies Rocks area back in the 1800s. So when we talk about the prevalence of iron furnaces in some of these really spooky areas, again, something Tim Renner pointed out early on, that seems like a heck of a concentration of some of these things that are, typically attributed with spooky areas. There's an actual ghost town there now.
Well, while you're searching for that,
Yeah.
yeah, obviously the plethora, rather the proliferation of iron
Yeah.
furnaces is, obviously we have a lot of those out here. I mean, our name is taken from, if you go into the woods of Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
especially immediately north of like where I'm at, but there was one in Zealand as well, or at least one. I think there were a couple maybe.
Right.
Sometimes you will come across these weird pyramids. And
Right.
those are the old iron furnaces, and they are these weird ghost furnaces. And if you didn't know what they were, I mean, you could be easily convinced that they could be any number of dire things. So, the Chickies Rock, so it does remind me of just some of those geologically irregular places. Like
Yeah, it's
for those
unique.
who've been to Gettysburg, for example,
Hmm.
Devil's Den,
Right.
it's singularly strange piece of land.
Yeah,
And
even if the Bal Gaysburg never happened, that place would still be famous for that, you know?
well, yeah, it would still have much of the same lore. It would still
Hmm.
be a haunted place because, again, look at it. It's just so
Hmm.
different. There has to be some story, and
Something.
in the absence of any story, we are going to create one, and we are going to create it with us in the center.
Right. And I think that's why these places just get these raps and everything. When it comes to like the correlation to the Albatwitch, we hear a lot of what we hear with other Bigfoot sightings, where we have this proliferation of ghost lights in the area. Some people attribute those ghost lights to natural magnetic phenomena due to the quartz crystals and the piezoelectric effect, that it can have. But still, we've talked many times about the correlation between ghost lights and Bigfoot. The noises that people apparently hear in the woods there is specifically the sound of whips cracking, which is interesting because like down in the creeks there would have been like towpaths where they would have used like donkeys and stuff, so maybe like
Sure.
whips were a thing. But when I read that, I think of like when people talk about other Bigfoot encounters, they talk about wood knocks. So are these
Branches
cracks,
snapping.
yeah,
Yeah.
are these branches snapping? Going back to my dryad theory, do dryads make sounds whenever they enter trees or leave trees? I don't know. One thing that I read a few places with like with the hauntings in the area, especially around the ghost town, people talk about hearing drumming in the forest, which is just generally spooky as hell to me. The idea of just drums in the woods, it's very orcish. But do you remember our conversation with your buddy? Yeah,
Yeah, out at that park, which you
yeah,
didn't name.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because you said that that was the very first thing I thought about when
Oh,
when
it's so
Chris was
creepy.
on,
Chris, thank you.
Chris
Yes.
M years ago. Yeah, I should reach out to him. But
Yeah, we should get it back on. But like that's just such a creepy thing. So like
right.
and you hear and this shows up in newspapers all over the place about, rate.
Well, and with Chris too, it should
Hmm.
be pointed out not only was there the fort nearby, which he also worked at and told us
Yeah.
stories about, but
Hmm.
also there were documented battles
Oh,
and
yeah.
skirmishes there
So
with the indigenous peoples.
so you have like by lots of accounts, whether it is just historically charged or energetically charged, there's a lot to this area. A lot of the old newspaper articles talk about people taking like trolleys and stuff up to Chickies Rocks and having these Albatwitches hop out of trees and steal apples and stuff and run away. And it sounds like when you watch videos now about people in like in different tropical areas and having those little like rhesus monkeys and stuff that hop out and steal people's water bottles and run away. That's like what it
Yeah.
sounds like.
And I actually was kind of wondering, is the origin of this story much like the Peninsula Python story we talked about,
Right.
where there were stories that lasted for years about snakes of unusual
Right.
size, and it turns
Hmm.
out there was a historical event, there was documentation. One of your friends actually was
Hmm.
able
Yeah.
to seek
Yes.
down the
Yeah.
actual articles.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they
You
found it.
have
Yeah.
to wonder if there wasn't a very similar story, maybe because if there's documented examples of these stories going back
Hmm.
to early 19th century or 18th century, maybe it wasn't a traveling zoo, but maybe it was a private menagerie.
Menagerie. And that's something that I've heard brought up around this before is when people talk about, especially in historical Bigfoot accounts, and you see this a lot in the mid to late 1800s, people saying like, oh, those are just escaped gorillas from like zoos and everything, or from traveling circuses. The reason, at least I don't think that generally holds up, is there weren't many around, and the ones that were around were extremely valuable to these whether it was the zoos or circus performers or private collectors. Even if you did have an ape that would escape somehow, it would have been reported like crazy. Because we do have examples of them getting out and them there being huge hunts for them and everything, and so
But maybe it
yeah.
was.
Oh, you're right,
And
precisely.
it
Yeah,
and that
it could be
part has
both. It
been
could
lost
be
to us,
could
right?
be both and absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, because that did happen. There is a lot of regional lore in the area where people kind of grew up hearing about Albatwitches, and it seems like they were used in that kind of folkloric tradition a lot of like keeping kids safe and on the paths to Chickies Rocks and not screwing around and everything. Like, oh, if you screw around, the Albatwitches are gonna come take you. They're gonna come mess with you. So there is that kind of like lighthearted side of it. Because again, I do like the idea of Edwardian era picnickers being accosted by, you know, Albatwitches.
Sure.
That's just kind of fun. It's just a funny. It's just I don't know. It sounds like a comedy. But again, this Chickies Rock area has a lot of wild stories. One of the ones that was brought up in the book you mentioned earlier, Beyond the Seventh Gate by Tim Renner, always stuck with me because whenever you hear ghost stories about an area and you're like, why isn't this story famous? Because it's so wild. Because we come across those sometimes. So I want to read this one because it's so unique, where it's like, what in the world could this have been? There's a lot of reported just straight up hauntings in this area too. So this is one story. So a horrifying apparition greeted Harriet Horn in 1946 when picnicking with coworkers at Chickies Hill. Harriet and an unnamed man drove off to retrieve some water. Before their car left the park, they came upon a terrible creature. 16 feet high and very thin. The being either had no arms and legs or they were obscured by the trees. It's difficult to tell from Harriet's description. However, she did recall strange details about the creature. The giant was wrapped in what looked like a mummy with three knives protruding from each side of its horrid head. Harriet's companion saw it as well, exclaiming, "My God, what is it?" He was barely able to drive the vehicle. They pulled off the road a quarter of a mile from the park in disbelief and shock, and they realized their coworkers were still at the picnic. Returning with great speed, they told their coworkers, "You got to get out of here. We saw something terrible," and the picnic was abandoned.
Well, I 14 feet tall,
16.
16
16.
feet tall. The
Imagine a
nice thing
16
is you
foot.
see it coming from a ways.
You would see it. Yeah, it's not going to hide very well, but imagine a 16-foot tall mummy with six knives sticking out of its head. That's just
Too
like
much.
it is too much, but like what a wonderful visual.
Well, the problem is too, it's just, oh yeah, inarguably, and very thin at that. The problem is that how do you just the Albatwitch thing, I could
Yeah.
find parallels where I could say,
Yeah.
well, this could be this could be that. This is so absurd. Like, okay, if it's people messing with people, this is some elaborate scarecrow thing.
Hmm.
It's going a bit far.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, more work than it's worth. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to
I
make of
just
that at
I
all.
just love
It's
I
not.
just love the visual.
Oh,
That's what
sure, the
it
visual
is.
is great, but what are we supposed to believe?
Yeah.
Are they trying to pass this off as something paranormal? Are they trying to
Yeah, I
pass
think
this off?
so. Yeah.
What is it? Because
Yeah, that's the thing
here's
is
the thing.
I like stories that are so weird.
Yes, it is weird.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, that's
It's
why I
so
like
weird,
it.
and
Yeah.
that story came out of the mid 20th
1946.
century.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Which is again after, just to be clear, 1946. When did the original Mummy come out? Not the
with
Brendan
Boris
Fraser
Karloff,
one. Yeah, the Boris Karloff one. There's the
1932, I
30,
do believe,
32.
but I'm
Yeah,
gonna look
something
it
like
up.
that. I know it was early. It was certainly early 30s.
I'm
Um,
gonna
yeah,
get us a
but
solid answer.
which is if you've never watched, if anyone out there hasn't ever watched the original, like the Boris Karloff one.
1932, I
Oh, you're
nailed it.
right.
Still
Excellent.
got it.
Good job. 10 points
Sorry.
to Nick. The original is fantastic. But so the word mummy was in like, the zeitgeist at the time it would have been. But yeah, so there's a lot of stories like that. The place is just really strange. And one of the things that I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but are you familiar with the Albatwitch festival that they have?
Yes, yes, I am. And every town needs to have something to
Every
rally.
town needs every town needs
Listen, we had horse
yeah.
trading days.
We have horse
Can't
trade
be,
days.
yeah. And
Yeah.
in the historic record, I don't believe a horse was ever traded.
Ever actually traded.
No, because
No
it only
one
started in like the 40s, I think.
Yeah, and no one actually trades in that town. Like it's all
No,
yeah,
goodness,
they
no.
are not trading people. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's definitely kind of captures people's imagination. It kind of like probably feeds itself a little bit. But again, as far as from a legitimacy standpoint, this is something that I kind of like look to. You know who's recorded a bunch of Albatwitch sightings over the years is our good friend Stan Gordon.
I knew it. All
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Well, funny enough, our pre-conversation
Hmm.
conversation, we talked about, you have to capitalize on everything, it seems like, and
Right.
I guess the town's going to capitalize on the Albert Witch.
Exactly. And now granted, the festival does look like fun.
Yeah,
Like I would go. I'd probably have a great time.
good, clean
Um,
fun.
I love that the Owl Twitch is like real into apples. I'm a big apple guy myself.
All day.
top tier fruit,
Palms aplenty.
palms of plenty. But so there's definitely resurgence in the Albatwitch's popularity. But it seems like, it does seem like it's been cited a lot over the years, and people in the area are kind of like proud of it and everything. And I think if anything, that feeds into the paranormal side of it, like we always talk about. If people are believing something is somewhere, then it's going to be seen more one way or the other.
Well, you
Uh,
shared a funny image with me the other day that I can't get out of my mind because it was an argument I made where you showed there was a
right.
graph that showed the prevalence, the increased prevalence of cameras and how it correlates with the increased video and photo evidence of giant squid.
Yeah, which are
But the track for Bigfoot
just
was
flat.
irregular, right? There was no correlation.
Yeah, it's which which again, it's funny, but I think that like there's a few ways you can look at that, obviously, because I
And
think it's like part of me thinks that like you can't, like it's just these things don't play by the same rules. I think that is more paranormal than normal. But boy, is it unsatisfying because of that, you know.
there's more to cheese to you than there is
Yeah.
of the real. It goes,
Yes.
but I think you hit the nail on the head a moment ago when you said that more people are believing in it or want to
Hmm.
believe or like the
Yeah.
idea of it, and therefore more sightings will occur.